This is a PSA. Hello, friends. It's hard to talk sometimes.
You're the golden return, got the strength to carry on, walk on my child, walk on.
Hello, beautiful soul family. Britt Cannon here, host of the Walk On podcast, the podcast where I try to demystify spirituality, personal growth and healing, and whatever else I feel like talking about. This week's episode is called Common Hang-Ups of Adult Survivors of Childhood Trauma. This is based on my reading and research surrounding adult children of alcoholics and just that whole scene, and a book written by, hang on please while I look it up, Janet G. Woititz, who in the 80s wrote this book called Adult Children of Alcoholics. And what stemmed from it was, hang on, I'm just scrolling back to my notes. It facilitated conversations and sort of support groups and healing circles for adult children of alcoholics, and like all of these self-help books that I love. I've read so many of them. I've read so many of them that I've sort of like transcended the need for them. Like every one I read is just affirmation of what I already know. But it's always good when you've been through gaslighting. It's always good to have reinforcement and affirmation for what you know to be true, because you're kind of used to having your reality denied. And all of these self-help books, my favorite ones, if you want to know more about the books that I've read, you can check out my episode called The Books That Helped Me Heal way back in the backlogs of this podcast YouTube channel, or in my episode backlog. Boy howdy, it's hard to talk sometimes. This is a PSA. Hello, friends. It's hard to talk sometimes. Speaking of, if you wouldn't mind giving this a little like, if you like it, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, tell me what you think in the comments. How have you struggled with these things? How have these things shown up in your life? That really helps boost the channel. That really helps me grow. I'm really trying to branch out into more of this kind of video content, but it's time consuming, and I need to know that people are watching in order to justify making more of it. And plus, I just want to get these messages out there because I'm really, really just trying to help show people that they don't have to suffer, that it doesn't have to be that hard, that healing is possible. So all you have to do is like, subscribe, hit that bell, and let me know how you feel about the stuff I talk about week to week by, interacting with my shit. Also, the link to the full hour-long episode is down below, as are the links to everything I do, and check that out too. So this is going to be a two-parter. I've never done a two-part episode before, but this is going to be a two-parter. So this week I'm just going to talk about the signs, the symptoms, the hang-ups, the behaviors, the beliefs, the struggles of adult survivors of childhood trauma. And next week, I'm going to go into some techniques in regard to healing them. And then the following week, I'm going to isolate one of them and do a whole episode about that, because some of them kind of like go together, but this one particular one just really stands out as something I want to discuss further. In fact, I wanted to do that episode this week, but then I was like, well, I should probably back it up and talk about all of the traits and then move forward and end up on that one. So anyway, getting ahead of myself as per usual. One thing about adult survivors of childhood trauma that is pretty universal is that when we finally get to therapy, our therapists a lot of times have to stop us and be like, hold on, rewind, let's get the chronology, because we tend to tell the story of our lives sort of out of order. And I just did that there. So bada bing, bada boom. There it is. So these traits are from Janet G. Woititz. She wrote a book called Adult Children of Alcoholics, and these characteristics traits are directly from that text. So highly recommend that you pick this up if you had alcoholic parents. I will say a small little disclaimer that, you know, as with a lot of these self-help books, especially ones that were written a while ago, they're a little heteronormative. They are a little fat phobic, because people love talking about fatness in relation to trauma instead of just like, you know, chalking it up to genetics or something. They always gotta blame it, like, oh, you must be really hurting if you are chunky or whatever. So it's like, okay, fuck you. But I'm not gonna throw the baby out with the bathwater. I will take the advice and what resonates and just like skip over that part, because fuck you very much. But besides those two things, it's pretty on point. It's pretty helpful. So if you find this video interesting and you'd like to check that out, definitely do that. So behavior number 1, guessing what normal is. So obviously, if you're born into a family that is chaotic, that is toxic, that is unstable, where people either struggle with addiction or various other kinds of instability, untreated mental illness, unchecked generational trauma, if we're all just playing out the same issues of our ancestors, you might not know what normal is. You grow up in that household, and your normal is different than everyone else's normal. I talk in the podcast about how I'm going to go pretty quickly through these, because the podcast episode itself went way over time, so I can get a little too deep into these if I'm not careful. So I'm going to just go a little quickly. Sorry about that, but there will be a whole nother episode next week about this same topic, so don't worry. Obviously, like your litmus test or your control, your perception of normal is different. I grew up with a lot of other poor, traumatized children with dysfunctional families. So like my idea of normal was totally off. And I had to find out through lots of uncomfortable situations and conversations throughout my life that what I experienced wasn't normal. The most helpful and healthy place that I experienced that was in therapy, where I could tell my therapist about stuff that happened to me or stuff that I went through, and she could be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Or like, you understand that wasn't normal, right? And that was super helpful. When it was happening, when I was just trying to make a joke or like tell a funny anecdote about my life and everyone had this look of horror across their face, that wasn't so nice. But guessing at what normal is. So if you feel like, wow, my normal is different than everyone else's normal, or, you know, I feel like I live in a little bit of a different reality, or I don't know how to behave with healthy families, or any variation on those themes, don't worry. It is normal for you to not know what normal is. And the beautiful thing about this is that you get to create your own reality. It's in your hands. And being an adult means that you're safe now. You can protect yourself. You can make different choices than were made for you when you were a kid. So just be empowered and take comfort in that. Number 2, I'm just looking at my phone for my notes. Sorry about that. Number 2, you have difficulty following a project through till the end. I think this has a little bit to do with impulsivity, which we'll talk about later, and also the co-occurrence of ADD and ADHD in traumatized people. Gabor Mate, who's another person whose books I really like, he poses that ADHD and ADD, these attention deficit issues, are linked to dissociation. So like you experience trauma, you leave your body, you leave your consciousness and your awareness, and therefore your attention is split, and you kind of learn how to exist in a different reality than the one you're in at the moment. And after going through and doing that ritual to protect yourself for long enough, it becomes your your regular way of being, and it's really hard to focus your attention because you've never been able to. You've always had to kind of leave your body in order to protect yourself and survive. I'm not a doctor, so I don't have any opinions on that, but I just think that's really interesting. So follow through is a challenge. And I think that's, if you think about it as a person who carries wounds from childhood trauma, you go into adulthood, it's like, hello world, what the fuck is happening? I don't know how to do this. And you were never shown stability. You were never shown follow through. You were never shown like wading through the waters of self-doubt, of self-sabotage, of commitment, of stability. Like so many people with like divorced parents who were toxic, like if you lived with one parent and the other parent was supposed to come get you on the weekends, you might have experienced a thing of like them never showing up, or plans always falling through and stuff like that. That just teaches you that, who cares about the outcome? Like nothing's going to work out the way you want to anyway. Fuck expectations. That's how you get disappointed. Like you get in this like cynical mood about life, and it just puts you in a kind of a bummer state, and a place where you don't want to trust anyone, you don't want to love anyone, you don't want to be vulnerable because you're afraid of what will come of that. And again, if you struggle with that, please know that it's normal. It's a perfectly reasonable response and reaction to the environment you grew up in. And if you carry any guilt or shame about that, please release it. It's okay. And if you struggle with following through, I have struggled in my life with keeping a job for longer than a couple years, for really showing up for people the way I'd like to, for even like carrying projects fully to fruition, either because my circumstances and my access to resources was never stable, because of being poor, or for lots of other reasons too, some internal, some external. And it's been a struggle in my life because I have a lot of goals and dreams and desires, but, sometimes life doesn't feel super supportive of those. And it feels really easy to kind of slip off track or get distracted or just give up before something is finished. And, it takes time. It takes truly reparenting yourself and building that foundation up again, rebuilding it from the bottom up. And it's tough. It's hard work, but it's worth it if you can get there. And you can get there by doing one little step at a time. Number 3, you might lie when it would be just as easy to tell the truth. This one kind of made me laugh because honestly, yeah, same. A lot of times in my household, like, if you did something wrong, like the trouble that you were going to get into was either being like yelled and screamed at, or being hit, or being threatened to be abandoned. And so like lying was a big part of survival. I have this poem in my book that's about, or this line in this poem in my book, that's "Who taught you to lie? God did." And it's about my sister and I. We were getting dropped off at this rec center every day all summer long because my grandma wanted to go out shopping without kids, and we would go swim in the pool. And you weren't supposed to go in the pool if you were younger than 8 without a parent. And my sister was younger than 8, but we lied about her age on her, like, my grandma did this, lied about her age on her pass so that she could go swimming. Well, one day she almost drowned. And they called her and they were like grilling us when we were waiting for her to show up. Who taught you to lie? Who taught you to lie? This girl is not 8 or whatever. And it was just this big, like, come to Jesus moment where we were like, our family taught us to lie, dude. We didn't fill out the paperwork, but, just that kind of vibe. When you grow up in an air of dishonesty, whether it's denial, whether it's deflection, whether it's gaslighting, whether it's straight up lying, whether it's just trying to survive. I mean, the cult-like mentality of toxic families requires you to lie, right? Lie to your teachers, lie to your guidance counselors, lie to the authorities, lie to CPS, lie to protect. And even when you're in a sticky situation, like you beat someone up or you do something wrong or you're about to get in trouble or something, and your first impulse is to lie. And that is a hard habit to break because you are scared. Like traumatized people who grew up becoming traumatized adults, wounded adults, you're scared all the time. You have so many fucking triggers. Life is so hard. You're constantly being abandoned. You're constantly being rejected. You're constantly fearing for your life. As you get older and you start providing for yourself, like sometimes your very survival depends on not getting in trouble, not losing your job. And being honest is really vulnerable sometimes. So this made me laugh because I used to like my sister and I often had like these funny little conversations when we were growing up of like, I kind of like have this thing where I lie for no good reason. And we both had it. And it was like, maybe wanting to seem more interesting, or maybe it was kind of like living in the fantasy of like what life would be like if we could be on soccer teams, or what life could be like if we had a loving mom, or what life could be like if we had a dad that was in the picture, And so it's the same thing with limerence. Like you're just kind of 1 foot in reality and 1 foot in fantasy. And sometimes it's more fun to be in the fantasy, and it's just a really hard habit to break. If you struggle with that, again, it's normal. It's on this list, which means enough people experienced it that it's in a fucking book about it. So unpack the shame, release the shame, just meet yourself where you are. All you can do is do better. But it does take a little work to get acquainted with the truth and to make the truth, acceptable or like palatable for yourself. It's okay to tell the truth. You may judge yourself without mercy. So a really mean inner monologue. You may have an inner monologue in your head that sounds like the voice of your parent. Whatever parent was most abusive to you, that may be how you speak to yourself. Really hard on yourself when you mess up, like a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of pressure, and just moving through life with that cloak of of shame, of guilt, of failure, just this fear that people are going to find you out, that they're going to be able to see and spot that wounded place in your heart. That I used to say, I feel like I have damaged goods, spray painted on my forehead. And because of that, I put a lot of pressure on myself to succeed. I was obsessed with my grades. I was obsessed with my weight. I was obsessed with just keeping up appearances. I was obsessed with being everything for everyone. I was obsessed with meeting others' expectations. I was just a ball of nerves, and it led to a very early nervous breakdown when I was 16 years old because I couldn't fucking take it anymore. You may have difficulty having fun. This one also really resonated with me, and it resonates with a later point that I guess I'll talk about now. Well, here we go. There's like a few that tie into this one. So may have difficulty having fun, may take yourself very seriously, and may be either super responsible or super irresponsible. So difficulty having fun. Like if you're always worried, if you're riddled with anxiety as a child, if you're worrying about everyone else, if you feel super responsible for the adults in your life, if you're cast in a sort of adult role when you should be a kid, if you find yourself being a caretaker for your parents or for the adults in your family or your other siblings, like you may be in this place of super responsibility. You hear people who had a lot of trauma in their childhoods often say, like, I feel like I didn't get a childhood. I feel like I was never able to be a kid. And that's where that comes from, right? Like if nobody's taking care of business, sometimes the kid has to be the one to step up. And that unnatural level of responsibility for a kid just sucks all the fun out of you, and you're not really able, besides the fact that you also take yourself very seriously, you may not be able to relax and understand how to have fun. And this is why inner child work is so important, because your inner child can teach you how to have fun. You can color in coloring books, you can dance and sing, you can do karaoke, you can like tell silly jokes, you can like find a big belly laugh moment, like you can just like do something really wacky to like shake yourself loose. Just getting in touch with that fun, the fun of life is playing frisbee, chasing your dog, just finding joy, finding light is incredibly healing. And it's never too late to give our inner child what they needed. It's never too late. You've never missed your opportunity. They're always inside you. And finding the fun of life is very, very healing. You might take yourself really seriously because, like in my family, and in a lot of families where there's emotional abuse especially, and all emotional abusers, or like all abusers in general, kind of do this thing where they set expectations really high. And so, when you're in their good graces, you're like the greatest thing since sliced bread. You're like an angel on earth. You're the perfect person. But the second you fuck up, or they perceive that you fuck up, you fall from grace like fucking Lucifer, and you're in hell before you know it. You are the worst person they've ever met. How could you do this? Like, you're such a bad person. And just pressure, and judgment projected at you. And usually that person's just talking to themselves. Keep that in mind. But the nitpicking, the criticism, the constant kind of like, you're failing, you're not doing enough, you're not good enough, you're not worthy of my love. Just, you carry that wound with you. You carry that way of being with you. It's sort of like, when you're ice skating or like rollerblading and you take them off and you go to try to walk and you're like, whoa, my legs don't know how to do this. That's like fun to a person who was hyper responsible in childhood. Your legs don't know how to do it. Your legs don't know how to let loose. You don't know how to have fun. You don't know how to not be super responsible. And it sets up a pattern of codependence where you end up attracting people or being attracted to people who need you to take care of them. That's how you feel like you earn love. That's how you feel like you deserve love. And so you give and give and give. And that's how you set up a pattern of codependence where you might be attracted to someone who reminds you of your parent in one way or another. That's how you end up losing your identity in relationships or as a parent. That's where you lose a grasp, or maybe you never found a grasp of like self-care or boundaries. And it can be really tough. It just zaps you of all energy and can lead you to some really dark places. So try to prioritize fun. I mean, I'll get more into the healing next week, like I said, but I just want you to know that all of these things are normal. If you experience them, it's okay. You're gonna be okay. It gets better from here. Trust and believe. I am living fucking proof. So when you're used to that kind of criticism, of course you take yourself seriously. Like, there's no room to laugh at yourself. You know what I mean? You're afraid. You're afraid of everyone seeing who you are. You're afraid to stand out. You're afraid. You just kind of end up like hiding and shrinking and trying to be as small as possible so as not to be seen, because if you're seen, you're a target. And that's a really tough way to live. But it sets up that pattern of like everything elicits a shame response. And I try to keep in mind when I deal with people who are very defensive, who don't communicate mindfully. Shout out my video, Mindful Communication, if you want to hear more about mindful communication. I try to keep in mind while keeping distance, because it is a necessity for the people that I let close to me, that they be able to mindfully communicate. But if someone can't, if they're super defensive, if they really go on the attack, if they really go after me, I try to remember and stay in my compassion that they're protecting themselves because they've always had to, and that it isn't really their fault. It is their responsibility to fix. It's not mine to show them how, unless, that's our dynamic and we've both agreed to it. But if not, then I release them lovingly without judgment. I do need mindful communication. I do need safety and intimacy and truth telling in my relationships, and that's not too much to ask. You may overreact to changes over which you have no control. I talk in the podcast about how I feel like my trauma made me hyper adaptable. I just go with the flow, man. Like, even if things are blowing up around me, I'm just kind of like, okay, we're doing this now. And that is a little bit because I tend to like take on the caregiver role in, I'm really great in a crisis. I can respond, react, take charge. I'm like, okay, but that's because I lived in crisis mode always. But so I don't struggle with this one as much, although I will say that being that adaptable really comes from being able to compartmentalize and like shut my emotions down, take care of the task at hand, and then feel it later. So I do have to keep in mind to like allow myself to have time to feel it later and not just stuff it down and ignore it forever, because it will rear its ugly head. But this rigidity, this need for control, this can manifest in like OCD patterns, in eating disorder, you know, like coping, any kind of coping where like control is the ideal, where you feel like if I can control everything, I will feel better. If I can control everything, I can feel safe. And then, of course, because life is change, right? Living is changing. Even our bodies change from the second we're conceived till the second, actually, till way past when we die. Constant change and transformation. So it can make you resistant to change. It can make you resistant to healing. It can make you resistant to taking the action you need to take in order to get to a place that is actually good for you. And so this can really get in your way as far as becoming a self-actualized person. And that's, I'm not saying that with judgment. I'm just saying that it may be something that you struggle with, and creating the kind of inner stability and inner safety and inner peace that comes with healing and that comes with really deep self-love is the way to kind of transcend that impulse to control, to stay put, to dig your heels in, and to get really upset at things you can't control. Also, you know, I love the serenity prayer. I've always said it to myself since I was a kid. The part of like, help me accept the things I cannot change the things I can, and make me wise enough to know the difference, right? So if I find myself worrying about like a health problem and I'm having those kind of OCD thoughts where I keep returning to it and keep returning to it and keep returning to it, and I just want to worry because I feel like if I worry about it, it will not happen. If I worry about it, I can control it. Then I stop myself and I'm like, can I actually do anything about this? No. So I gotta let it go. It's not as easy as that, but that is my process in a nutshell. You may constantly seek approval or affirmation. This comes from the deep insecurity. You know, you're supposed to get approval and affirmation as a child. You're supposed to be really affirmed. You're supposed to be nurtured into a place of self-confidence. You're, you know, like a securely attached kid will feel comfortable like going off and playing by themselves, making friends, exploring the world, and occasionally they'll like kind of miss you and want to connect with you, and they'll come to you and connect. And then when they feel like they got what they need, they'll go back and explore. And so both people in that interaction need to be kind of secure and like able for that freedom to exist. And an insecure child will either not leave that person's side, or like you can tell when you work with children, like if a parent comes to pick up a child and the child doesn't react at all, you know, if the parent leaves and they barely notice, or if they cry all day long because they are experiencing some really, really bad separation anxiety, like those are signs of an unhealthy or like not fully formed attachment. You're supposed to build them up. You're supposed to make sure they feel secure. You're supposed to make sure they feel whole on their own, that they feel confident. And all humans need external validation. All humans need a boost. You know, we all need applause from now and then, for every now and then. This is why I say that people who really want fame are like wounded in some way. That's why so many famous people, especially the mega famous people, usually have really traumatic childhoods and usually have kind of tragic lives, because that need for like that level of validation and affirmation and like love is a wound. You know, you're trying to fill up something that's so empty, that you need so much to come your way in order to feel loved and feel whole. And usually at the end of their lives, these people lament that like, I have all, you know, everyone in the world loves me and I feel lonely, I feel alone, I feel unlovable still. And that's because that's a wound that needs tended to internally. You know, confidence comes from within. I always talk about how like we have this thing in our brains where you can get 100 comments, and if one of the comments is negative, you'll feel like that was a bad post. You know, we fixate on the negative because that's where the wound is. And it is possible to nurture confidence and like validation and affirmation within yourself. And then when you receive it, you know, how you ever met someone who's like really insecure and you try to compliment them and they just can't take it? Like they just cannot graciously take a compliment. They can't even just be like, thank you. They have to like argue with you about the thing you're complimenting them about. I'm a Libra. I love complimenting. So this is like a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, but not really, because I'm not annoyed by it. I'm just kind of like, oh, take my love. I want you to have it. and, that's what this is. You know, that's being so out of alignment with love and affirmation and validation that like you can't even receive it when someone's trying to give it to you. You can't even like hear it or see it. And that comes from this place. So you need it, but you're out of alignment with it. So to get yourself in alignment with it, you have to give it to yourself. And then the need for it kind of like subsides. And when you get it, it's nice, but you don't need it. You may feel that you are different from other people, and baby cakes, that's because you are. Most of us walking this earth are traumatized in one way or another. So in that way, you're not that different. In that way, you're kind of the same. But we all carry our own unique wounds. I mean, like, it's like when you grow up in a trauma-filled household and you go to like your stable friends' house for dinner and everyone's nice to each other and everyone loves each other and like it's peaceful and the parents, like, there's stability and the rules and like it's just really normal. There's that word again. And you're kind of like, wow, I am very different than this kid. You know, like I seem to have a whole lot more hangups than them. I seem to be really struggling in ways that they probably never will. And it's true, you know, but at our core, like no one is born traumatized. No one, you know, these are things we go through, but they don't define us. They are just, you know, they may have molded us, they may have influenced us, but everything having to do with this kind of trauma, at least the stuff that's not physical, is healable. We may always be wounded. We may always be survivors of childhood trauma. We may always be different, but we are human, you know. At our core, we're alive, we're breathing, and I think in many ways, like, everyone's own unique experience brings a piece of the cosmic puzzle to the cosmic puzzle. You know, we all hold a little bit of the story, and your story is just as important as anybody else's, and your existence is just important as anybody else's. And so different doesn't mean less than, you know, different just means you're working with a different set of circumstances. I don't expect anyone to be grateful for their trauma, but I am grateful for mine. I feel that it made me soft. I feel that it showed me what I didn't want to be. It showed me how I didn't want to treat people. It helped push me away from my family of origin. It helped lead, like, it wasn't the bad experiences. Of course it was me. I was choosing these things. I was making these choices. I chose to love myself. I chose to protect myself. I chose to lay the boundaries that eventually set me free. But I'm the artist I am because I've suffered. I am the teacher I am because I've suffered. I am the friend I am because I've suffered. I'm the partner I am because I've suffered. And there was healing that had to take place for me to become this person. But I do feel that I am softer because of the pressure of my life. I'm more of a diamond because I was squished. And that's just how I feel. I don't expect anyone else to feel that way. It's okay if you don't feel that way, but that's how I feel. So different doesn't mean bad, you know? Super responsible or super irresponsible. I already talked about that. But, you know, you can either be like a hyper vigilant sort of person, or you can be someone who likes to lose themselves. You know, you could avoid responsibility at all costs. I've been on both sides of the spectrum, where I've been like hyper responsible, and then I had my breakdown, and then I was like, fuck it. And I just lived by the wind, you know? And definitely pay the price for it today. I'm having to learn the balance, you know, how to be responsible without losing myself, how to, you know, be responsible and like a good friend and a good partner without kind of forgetting that I'm an individual, while also, you know, giving myself what I need and laying boundaries and having fun, because we deserve fun. Especially if you haven't had a lot of it, you do kind of deserve some. You know, everyone deserves fun. Everyone deserves joy. Everyone deserves love. Everyone deserves to be an individual. And no one deserves to be any more or less responsible than anybody else. This is the one I want to do its own episode about. So extremely loyal. You may be extremely ride or motherfucking die loyal to the point that is unhealthy. Like, even in the face of evidence that the loyalty is undeserved. And this is where we get into like getting into abusive relationships, staying no matter what, getting taken advantage of. The loyalty can be toxic. And I used to always think that my loyalty was my best trait. I used to think that it was like what I had to offer. And I have had to unlearn that and realize that healthy relationships don't require a ride or die person. Healthy relationships don't require that kind of loyalty, because you just show up, have a chat, love each other. There is no test. There is no challenge. There is no chaos. There is no drama. Like you just show up and you like have a good time. It's just stable and nice and supportive. And so I'm going to do a whole episode on that one. I won't get into it too much here. And then lastly, you may be impulsive. That goes back into that ADD, ADHD thing I was talking about before, where like you may tend to lock yourself into a course of action without giving serious consideration to alternative behaviors or possible consequences. So like making a decision without considering the outcome, without considering the consequences, without considering the ways in which it might be a bad choice. This impulsivity leads to confusion, self-loathing, and loss of control over your environment. In addition, you may spend an excessive amount of energy cleaning up the mess. So you may get yourself into some sticky situations. You may move too fast in a relationship and you're living with the person before you realize they're toxic. Or you may quit your job because you got super triggered and you feel like you can't do it anymore. And then you wake up the next day and you're like, whoopsie, I have bills to pay. Or you may get involved with someone who's married. Or, I mean, this can play out a multitude of ways. And as you heal, you do kind of vibrate at a more stable frequency where you think things through. There's no more scarcity feelings. There's no more like, if I don't take this chance right now, I might never get it. Like you're okay with going slower because you're not in survival mode. And being in survival mode is a way that you had to be to survive. That was the reality of the situation you were in, and it served you in a way, but it no longer does. So it's okay to release that. And at first, going slow is a challenge. At first, it is a conscious minute-to-minute decision, but it does become like your primary way of being after a certain amount of healing. And it really does serve. So If some of this resonated, I'm so sorry for what you've been through, but you are okay. You're a survivor. You're stronger and more resilient than you realize. Tune in next week to find my little tidbits that I've picked up along the way as far as healing these patterns. And I wish you a safe and happy and joyful week. I challenge you to find some fun. I challenge you to engage with self love. If you don't know where to start with self love, you can sign up for my self love course. The link is down below. There are guided meditations, there's journal prompts, there's writing assignments where we do letter writing exercises, there's inner child work, there's self-care rituals, there's a whole bunch of good stuff. You get a tarot reading at the beginning and one at the end from me. We have a one-on-one session where we talk about your intentions, your goals, the things you struggle with, and I coach you through it. There's a Facebook community that goes along with the course where you can engage with other people who are learning how to love themselves. And it's just a really good time. So if you're interested in that, you can click the link down below. Otherwise, I will see you next week. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for doing the work. Happy healing. Bye.
This one goes out to